Emily sat in her sunlit kitchen, sipping a cup of coffee as the morning light poured through the windows. It was a typical morning in her life, busy, but manageable. Her 2 children, Sarah and James, were getting ready for school, and Mark, her husband of 12 years, was in the living room, sipping his own coffee and reading the newspaper. Life at this moment felt ordinary, stable, and in many ways perfect. Emily had always prided herself on being able to balance it all: career, family, and maintaining a healthy relationship with her husband. But deep down, she often wondered if there was more to life than this constant juggle. The perfect family image. Emily had always been the type of person who tried to maintain a perfect balance between work and family. Before deciding to step back from her career, she worked in a high-pressure marketing job. She was good at it. No, she was exceptional at it. Promotions came fast, and by the time she was 40, Emily had earned the respect of her colleagues and superiors. She was proud of her achievements and the fact that she had managed to do it all without sacrificing her family life. Mark, her husband, was a steady, reliable man. They had built a life together, a life that seemed perfect from the outside. They had their ups and downs, but they always managed to come together. Emily felt like she was living the American dream: successful career, beautiful children, a loving husband, and a home that was warm and inviting. But even in the midst of all this, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. There was a yearning for something deeper, something more meaningful than the rat race she had been running. The turning point: deciding to stay home. One day, after another grueling week of work, Emily sat down with Mark and made a decision that would change the course of her life. She had decided to leave her high-paying marketing job. It wasn't an easy decision. The job had given her a sense of purpose and accomplishment, but she was finding herself stretched thin. Her children were growing up too quickly, and she didn't want to miss out on their formative years. She wanted to be there for them, truly be there, and to have the time to focus on nurturing her family in a way she hadn't been able to while working long hours. "Mark, I think it's time," she said softly as she looked across the dinner table, her hands clasped together. "I want to stay home and focus on the family. I've missed too much already." Mark paused, surprised by her sudden declaration. "But, Emily, your career, everything you've built, are you sure?" Emily smiled, her eyes welling with emotion. "I'm sure. I need to do this for me and for us. The kids are growing up fast, and I want to be there for them, not just as a mother, but as a role model, a guide. I don't want to look back and regret not being present." Mark, ever supportive, nodded slowly, though a trace of concern lingered on his face. "If this is what you want, then I support you. But, are you ready for the change? It's not going to be easy." Emily's heart swelled with relief and anticipation. She knew this was the right choice, but little did she know, the decision would bring forth challenges she hadn't anticipated, challenges not just within her family, but within herself. The pressure to be perfect. As Emily transitioned into her new role as a stay-at-home mom, she quickly realized that leaving her career behind didn't mean the pressure to be perfect went away. In fact, it only increased. The expectations of what a mother should be, what a wife should be, and what a woman should accomplish were not only external but internalized. Emily began to feel like she was under a microscope, constantly being watched by others, especially Ruth, her mother-in-law. Ruth was a woman who had strong views on what it meant to be a good wife and mother. She came from a generation where women were expected to not only maintain a home but also do so with grace and poise. Ruth had always made it clear that Emily's decision to leave her career was something she didn't fully understand or approve of. She thought Emily should still be contributing financially to the family, regardless of her desire to focus on raising the kids. Ruth's expectations were high, and while Emily had always tried to live up to them, it was becoming increasingly difficult. The strain of family expectations. At family gatherings, Emily felt like an outsider. Ruth, often speaking highly of other women in the family, especially those who managed to balance careers and motherhood, seemed to make Emily feel small and inadequate. No matter how hard she tried to put on a brave face, Ruth's remarks cut deep. The older woman would frequently say things like, "Your cousin Amanda, she's running her own business while raising 3 kids. She's doing so well. You could learn a lot from her," or, "I've always admired how your aunt keeps the house spotless while managing her full-time job." Emily couldn't help but feel the sting of these comparisons. She was doing her best to raise 2 children, keep the house in order, and support her husband, but it seemed like it was never enough. She found herself wondering if Ruth even saw her as a capable woman or just as a mother whose role was to stay at home and meet everyone else's expectations. The constant comparisons to other women in the family, who seemed to juggle it all effortlessly, made Emily question her own worth. She felt like she couldn't win. If she worked outside the home, she would be criticized for neglecting her family, but if she stayed home, she was seen as not contributing enough. The burden of trying to be everything. With each passing day, Emily found herself sinking deeper into frustration and doubt. She was trying so hard to be everything that Ruth wanted her to be, everything society expected of her, and everything her children and husband needed. She felt as though she had no time for herself, no time to just breathe. Emily had always been a perfectionist, and now that she was at home, she expected perfection from herself in every aspect of her life. The house had to be spotless. The children had to be well-behaved and excel in school. Mark had to be happy and content. But no matter how hard she worked, it felt like something was always missing. She was running on empty, trying to live up to standards that no one could ever meet. But in the stillness of the early morning, when Emily sat alone with her coffee before the world woke up, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had given up something for the sake of everyone else, and in doing so, she had lost a part of herself. Looking ahead. In the quiet moments, Emily realized that she needed a change, not just in her external circumstances, but in her mindset. She had given up so much to meet other people's expectations, but now, it was time to ask herself, what did she want? Was being the perfect wife and mother enough for her, or was there something more she needed to discover about herself? This chapter ends with Emily standing at a crossroads, torn between trying to be everything for everyone and finding a way to be true to herself. Little did she know, this internal conflict would set the stage for the emotional and personal growth she would undergo in the chapters to come. As the weeks passed, Emily began to notice growing tension between her and Ruth, her mother-in-law. At first, it was little comments here and there, nothing overtly harsh, but enough to plant seeds of doubt in her mind. Ruth would casually bring up stories about other women in the family, especially those who seemed to have it all together, working full-time, raising children, maintaining perfect homes, and still looking flawless. Emily, on the other hand, was struggling to keep up with the endless responsibilities of managing the household and caring for her kids. She was starting to feel like she was falling short, and it was Ruth's subtle comments that were pushing her deeper into that belief. The first comparison, a subtle criticism. It all started one sunny afternoon when Emily invited Ruth over to help prepare for a family dinner. Ruth had always been a frequent visitor, often coming over to check in on the kids and offering unsolicited advice. Emily had grown accustomed to Ruth's visits but still felt a pang of anxiety each time. "Emily, dear, I notice that your curtains are getting a bit old," Ruth commented as she adjusted the cushions on the couch. "When your cousin Amanda moved into her new house, she had it redecorated, and it looks fabulous. Maybe you should do the same. It's important for a home to look fresh, don't you think?" Emily's heart sank. She had been trying to make the house comfortable for her family, but Ruth's comment made her feel like she wasn't doing enough. It wasn't the first time Ruth had remarked on Emily's home or her choices. It seemed every visit brought a new comparison to someone else. Emily was used to hearing about how well other women managed their lives, but the weight of these comparisons was becoming unbearable. "I'm sure Amanda has the resources to do that, Ruth," Emily replied, trying to stay calm. "But we're doing okay with what we have. The kids like the house just the way it is." Ruth waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I understand. But if you had a bit more time, maybe you could focus on things like that. It's important to keep up with appearances." Emily tried to brush off the comment, but it lingered in her mind long after Ruth had left. She felt self-conscious about the state of her home, questioning whether she was doing enough to create a perfect environment for her children and husband. Ruth's words had planted a seed of insecurity, a feeling that would grow stronger over time. The growing pressure. As the weeks passed, the comparisons became more frequent. Ruth would casually mention how her other daughter-in-law, Lisa, had redecorated her entire house and was running a successful business from home. "She's such a wonderful role model for the kids," Ruth would say, her eyes glistening with pride. "Lisa really knows how to juggle it all." Emily's stomach churned every time Ruth mentioned Lisa. She admired Lisa for her accomplishments, but every time Ruth talked about her, it felt like a sharp reminder that Emily wasn't doing enough. The constant comparisons were beginning to take a toll on her mental and emotional well-being. She loved her family, but the pressure to live up to an ideal that Ruth seemed to set was becoming too much. The perfect woman, Amanda. Ruth's admiration for Amanda, another of Mark's cousins, was no secret. Emily had met Amanda several times over the years, and while they got along, there was something about Amanda's presence that made Emily feel small. Amanda was effortlessly graceful, a career woman who always seemed to have everything under control. She worked full-time, was a mother of 3, and always looked put together, even in the most chaotic situations. During a family barbecue, Ruth couldn't stop gushing about Amanda's latest achievements. "You know, Amanda just launched her own business," Ruth announced to the entire family, "and she's already making waves. She's a real inspiration to all of us." Emily, who had stepped back from her career to raise her children, couldn't help but feel the sting of comparison. She had made the decision to stay home because she believed it was what was best for her family. Yet, in Ruth's eyes, it seemed she was failing to live up to the standards set by Amanda. "You know, Emily," Ruth said one afternoon when she stopped by, "I can't help but notice how much Amanda has accomplished. It must feel great to have your own business, don't you think? Maybe you should think about doing something like that." Emily felt a tight knot in her chest as Ruth's words sank in. She had always respected Amanda, but it was hard not to feel overshadowed by her success. Ruth's praise for Amanda made Emily question whether she had made the right choice by leaving her career behind. Would her family be better off if she had followed Amanda's path? Would her value as a mother and wife be higher if she, too, had a thriving career? Struggling with self-worth. The comparisons continued to wear Emily down. Every conversation with Ruth seemed to highlight how Emily fell short in comparison to other women in the family. The pressure to be the perfect mother, wife, and career woman was overwhelming. Emily began to doubt herself more and more. She was always the one trying to maintain the image of the perfect mother: clean house, well-behaved kids, delicious meals, but in Ruth's eyes, it seemed she was never quite good enough. Emily tried to express her feelings to Mark one evening after dinner, but he shrugged it off. "Ruth doesn't mean anything by it, Emily. She just wants the best for you. Maybe you're being a little sensitive." But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Ruth's comments were cutting deeper than simple criticism. They were undermining her confidence and making her question her choices. The constant comparisons were taking a toll on her mental health, and she felt like she was losing her sense of self. The breaking point. Emily reached a breaking point one afternoon when Ruth casually dropped another comparison while preparing for a family dinner. "You know, Emily," Ruth began, "Amanda just took a week off for a family vacation, but she's already back at work, handling everything with ease. I wish I could take some time off, but it seems like you found a way to make it work." This time, Emily couldn't hold back the tears. She had been trying so hard to balance everything, but the constant comparisons pushed her to the edge. She excused herself from the room, retreated to the bedroom, where she sat on the bed and cried. She wasn't crying because of Ruth's words, she was crying because she had lost sight of who she was. All she had wanted was to be a good wife, mother, and woman, but Ruth's constant comparisons made her feel inadequate in every way. A moment of clarity. That evening, as Emily wiped away her tears and sat alone in her thoughts, a wave of clarity washed over her. She realized she couldn't keep living this way, constantly comparing herself to others and trying to meet expectations that weren't her own. She had made a choice to focus on her family, and that was enough. She was enough. Emily decided that she couldn't let Ruth's comparisons define her any longer. She needed to find her voice again and stop measuring her worth by other people's standards. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was determined to take the first step toward reclaiming her sense of self-worth. As the months passed, the subtle comparisons and passive critiques from Ruth, Emily's mother-in-law, became more pronounced. Emily's confidence, once steady and assured, began to unravel with every visit. Ruth, never one to mince words, had always been critical of Emily's choices, but now the criticisms were more frequent and more direct. It wasn't just the house anymore, it was the way Emily raised her children, the way she cooked, the way she dressed. No matter what Emily did, Ruth always found something to criticize. Everyday criticism, a slow erosion of confidence. One afternoon, Emily was preparing dinner when Ruth stopped by unannounced. She entered the kitchen, her sharp eyes scanning the countertop, and immediately began her usual round of unsolicited advice. "Emily, dear, you really should try a different recipe for the kids' dinner. I don't know why you keep making spaghetti. Amanda's kids love those little homemade meatballs. She gets the recipe from her mother. Maybe you should try it," Ruth suggested, lifting an eyebrow as if Emily's dinner choices were a glaring mistake. Emily's stomach twisted, and she quickly forced a smile, trying to brush off the comment. They like spaghetti, Ruth. They don't always need something fancy. But even as she spoke, a part of her began to doubt herself. Was spaghetti too simple? Was she not doing enough for her kids? The weight of Ruth's words settled on her shoulders like an invisible burden, and she felt her confidence waver once again. Later, Emily found herself staring at the empty plate after dinner, lost in thought. The children had eaten everything, enjoying their meal, but Ruth's words lingered. Was she failing at even the most basic tasks? Cooking, cleaning, raising children, everything felt like it was being scrutinized by Ruth, who never seemed to think Emily was doing enough. The pressure of perfection. This wasn't the first time Ruth had cast doubt on Emily's choices. Over the past few months, Emily had begun to feel like she was living in a world of perfection that she could never reach. Ruth had a way of casually dropping comments, almost as if they were harmless observations, but to Emily, they felt like heavy stones in a backpack she couldn't take off. They made her feel like no matter what she did, she was always falling short of Ruth's expectations. One evening, after Emily had spent hours cleaning and tidying up the house, Ruth came by to check on the kids. Emily was exhausted, having spent the day with her children and preparing meals for the week ahead. As Ruth surveyed the house, she made a comment that Emily could no longer ignore. You know, Emily, if you spend a little more time organizing the garage, things would be easier, Ruth said, glancing at the piles of seasonal items stacked near the back door. I've always admired how Lisa keeps everything in its place. It's not that hard to maintain, really. The comment hit Emily harder than she expected. She had been working so hard to keep up with everything at home, and now it seemed like Ruth was criticizing even the smallest details. Lisa, her sister-in-law, seemed to be Ruth's measuring stick for everything Emily did. Emily couldn't understand why Ruth couldn't see all the effort she was putting in. Why was it never enough? The emotional toll, doubts and anxiety. Over time, these constant remarks began to take their toll on Emily's emotional well-being. She had always prided herself on being an organized, caring mother and wife. But with Ruth's constant criticisms, she began to feel like she couldn't live up to the standard that Ruth had set. Emily started questioning herself more than ever before. Was she a good enough mother? Was her house clean enough? Was she being a good wife to Mark? Her mind became a battleground of self-doubt. She found herself thinking about Ruth's comments even when she wasn't around. During the night, when Emily tried to sleep, Ruth's voice echoed in her mind, replaying every criticism. It was exhausting. Every task felt like it was being judged, and every choice she made seemed like the wrong one. Her self-esteem, once solid, began to crack. Emily had always been the kind of woman who could handle anything, but now, she felt herself crumbling under the weight of it all. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who was failing, not at being a mother, but at being good enough. Strained relationships, the divide grows. The emotional strain wasn't just affecting Emily, it was beginning to affect her marriage as well. Mark, her husband, noticed that Emily was withdrawing more and more. She became quieter during family gatherings, and when Ruth was around, Emily seemed distant, almost defeated. He tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a temporary phase, but deep down, he could sense the tension between them. One evening, after Ruth had left, Emily collapsed onto the couch in tears. Mark, I can't keep doing this. I feel like I'm failing at everything. No matter what I do, I'm just not good enough for your mom. Every time she comes over, it's like I'm under a microscope, and I'm being graded on everything I do. Mark sighed and rubbed his face, feeling the weight of the situation. He loved Emily dearly, but he had always been stuck in the middle between his wife and his mother. I know it's hard, Emily, but Ruth doesn't mean to hurt you. She just doesn't understand how much you're already doing. I'll talk to her. But Emily, exhausted from the endless cycle of criticism, shook her head. No, Mark. It's not about Ruth. It's about me. I don't feel good about myself anymore. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. The conversation left Emily feeling empty. She knew Mark was trying, but it didn't change the fact that she felt alone in this struggle. Ruth's criticisms were no longer just about housework or dinner, they were slowly eroding her sense of self-worth. A new level of exhaustion. In the days that followed, Emily's anxiety grew. Every visit from Ruth, every phone call, and even every casual mention of another woman in the family felt like a slap to the face. She was so tired, mentally, emotionally, physically, that she found herself retreating into her own world. She stopped caring as much about keeping up with the perfect house, and instead, her focus turned inward. She needed to find some peace, some way to quiet the voice inside her head that kept replaying Ruth's critiques. That's when Emily realized that she couldn't keep allowing Ruth's words to dictate her self-worth. She had to make a choice, either continue to let these criticisms tear her down, or find a way to reclaim her confidence. The beginning of change. As Emily sat with her thoughts one evening, a small voice inside her told her that enough was enough. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to live up to someone else's idea of success. She was doing her best, and that was all that mattered. It was time to stop letting Ruth's opinions define who she was. This chapter marked the beginning of Emily's journey to reclaim her sense of self. While the road ahead would be difficult, Emily knew that confronting these emotional challenges was the first step toward finding peace and restoring her confidence.